At 6 o'clock in the morning, having skipped Novocherkassk, I was again approaching the village of Kadamovsky, where that night the headquarters of the 37th Army was located. But what was my surprise when I saw that the bridge over the river was blown up, and the army headquarters was no longer in the village. On the destroyed bridge, my lieutenant and I crossed the Kadamovskaya River on foot. On the southeastern outskirts of the village saw combat and transport vehicles of one division and the headquarters of the 49th Regiment, headed by the Chief of Staff of the regiment, Major M.Y. Yakushev, who used to work in the headquarters of our task force as a senior officer. He reported that the division without shells and vehicles without fuel. How did it happen, Comrade Yakushev, that you could not provide fuel not only for the division, but also for the regiment headquarters? I asked sternly. Yakushev looked tired, sunken cheeks and inflamed eyes spoke of more than one sleepless night. Stretching out at attention, he reported, Comrade Colonel, for the 6th day we have been fighting continuously. We are always being moved to where the enemy is breaking through the defence. Urgently organise the search for fuel in the village, in the MTS and collective farms. Intercept and stop all the vehicles that will appear. First of all, refuel the combat units. To our luck, we soon managed to stop a tanker truck with fuel, which was searching for its tank unit for the 2nd day. Guardsmen refueled all the vehicles of the division and regimental headquarters. Immediately lead the column through the village of Marion. And then on the Shakhtinsky highway to Novocherkassk I ordered Yakushev. The cars of the division and regimental headquarters began to pull onto the road, and I and a lieutenant from the 43rd Regiment returned to my semi-truck. We also moved along the west bank of the Kadamovskaya River toward the village of Marion, watching Yakushev's column. When it was crossing to the western bank of the river, enemy planes began to circle over it, and a group of fascist tanks appeared from the southeastern outskirts of the town of Shakhty. It was heading in the direction of the village of Marion, towards Yakushev's column. On the road to Novocherkassk also moved enemy tanks. None of the guardsmen of Yakushev's column saw the enemy tanks. No one heard our signals warning of danger. There was no way to overcome steep ravines and swampy streams by car to warn Yakushev. To bypass the ravines on the Shakhtinskoye highway, it meant to run into a tank column of fascists, which was in full swing on Novocherkassk. What could be more offensive than to see and realize what threat was hanging over my comrades in arms and not be able to help them? Volodya, my dear, I said, addressing the lieutenant, as much as you have strength, run across the ravines in front of Yakushev, warn him. Tell him to turn around and move to the Melikovskaya crossing. You stay with Yakushev, and Grigoriev and I will try to overtake the tanks and warn Novocherkassk. The lieutenant jumped out of the back of a semi-truck and ran in front of the column of Katyusha. At that time it was attacked by dive bombers and began to disperse in the ravines. The movement slowed down. This allowed Volodya to run to Yakushev's car in time to warn him of the danger. The column turned around and quickly went back. Meanwhile, the enemy tanks, going to Novocherkassk, advanced far ahead. I knew that their appearance from this direction would be a complete surprise for the city. Parallel field roads at a distance of 1.5 kilometers from the fascist tanks. Overtaking them, we rushed to Novocherkassk. On the eastern outskirts of the city, in Kutunka, I met another division of the 49th Regiment, which after a night march stopped here for a rest. The division was ordered to meet enemy tanks with fire. We rushed on. We enter the city. Everything is still quiet in it. Our car stops at the building of the City Party Committee. I ran into the office of the secretary. At that time there was a meeting of the City Defense Committee, headed by the secretary of the City Committee, Alexei Kobylev. Fascist tanks are approaching the city from the east, I reported from the start. In a few minutes in Novocherkassk was announced alarm, sent guards to the bridge, put on alert parts of the garrison and militia units, led by Associate Professor of the Industrial Institute Ivan Rudenko. Novocherkassk had been preparing for a long time for defence. On its outskirts were built pillboxes, bunkers, dug trenches, anti-tank ditches, made and placed hedgehogs and concrete hollows. These works were carried out under the guidance of the Defence Committee of the City Party Committee, and the City Council. From 12 to 15,000 residents worked daily on the construction of defensive structures. By that time, evacuation of the population as well as plants, factories, educational institutions, hospitals was finished. In the city, from 125,000 inhabitants remained only 43,000. At the factory named after S.M. Budioni was organized production of mortars. Liquor factory produced bottles with flammable liquid. Even on July 20th, the front line was 35 to 40 kilometers away from Novocherkassk. However, on the night of July 21st, the troops of the 37th Army were forced to leave the city of Shakhty, and enemy tanks suddenly approached Novocherkassk from the east, which was a complete surprise to everyone. I was concerned about the fate of Yakushev's column and the readiness for battle of the division of the 49th Regiment, and I hurried to Hutenok. When we crossed the bridge, we saw, to our dismay, that the division had not yet had time to take up battle order. Time had been lost. I ordered the division to immediately cross the bridge to the western outskirts of the city and prepare a fire on Hutenok, and myself decided to rush to the Melikovskaya crossing, where Yakushev's column was headed. Towards us, on the road coming from Shakhty, people were running, cars and wagons were rushing, and fascist tanks were moving after them, pouring machine gun fire on the refugees. Too late. I can't get to Yakushev, I thought bitterly. We turned the car around and returned to Novocherkassk. We went up to the city arch, and suddenly we see two of our T-26 tanks slowly creeping up the hill. One of them is towing the other one. I jumped out of the car, ran up to the head tank, jumped on the armor and shouted through the observation slot. Nazi tanks are coming from behind. They will be on the bridge now. Turn around. The tank stopped. But you can't turn around with a tugboat quickly. When the lead vehicle turned around, the first enemy tanks were already on the bridge. With a shot from 76mm gun, our guys managed to hit one German tank in the middle of the bridge. Then the second tank caught fire. By return fire, Hitlerites hit our faulty machine, which, having turned back the turret, fired at the enemy. Burning German tanks formed a traffic jam on the bridge. The tank column of fascists was stopped. It failed to break into Novocherkassk. By this time, on the northwestern outskirts of the city deployed two divisions of the 8th Guards Mortar Regiment, transferred the day before to Novocherkassk. The divisions are ready to open fire on the enemy located in Kutunka, reported to me the commander of the regiment, Lieutenant Colonel Lobanov, when I arrived at his observation post. Katyusha gave 2 divisional volleys. They were effective. The shells covered the enemy's manpower and equipment. After our salvos to the observation post of the commander of the 8th GMP arrived the commander of the artillery front, Major General I. Y. Juk, and the head of the Rostov fortification, Major General P. V. Cherniev. In the future, to the defense of Novocherkassk were connected and artillery units, which under the leadership of General Zhuk fired on the approaching enemy columns. In the defense of Novocherkassk took part and the division of the 49th Regiment, which from Kutunk managed to move to the western outskirts of Novocherkassk, the headquarters of the 49th Regiment and its other division, headed by Major Yakushev, crossed the Don near Melikovskaya. In the evening of July 21st, I received an order from the front headquarters to withdraw the Guards mortar units from Novocherkassk to Rostov. And the fighting for Novocherkassk continued. Rifle and artillery units, militia units heroically defended every street, every house for more than 4 days. But forces were too unequal. July 25th, 1942, the city had to leave. So our way lay to Rostov. The 8th Guards Mortar Regiment was transferred to reinforce the units of the 56th Army. Artillery depot was to be relocated to the left bank of the Don, and the headquarters of the task force in the area of Michitinskaya. Before leaving for Rostov, I decided to stop by the farm Maly Mishkin. I wanted to make sure that the headquarters of the task force, the artillery depot and the mobile repair shop were evacuated. On the way to Maly Mishkin, I had to witness a rocket salvo of 2 combat installations. When I approached them, to my surprise, I saw that soldiers of my native 4th Guards Mortar Regiment were standing near the machines. The guardsmen were very happy about our unexpected meeting and surrounded me. I wondered how they found themselves here, in the troops of another front. The identification marks failed, answered the commander of the combat unit. On your vehicles are the same signs as on the vehicles of our regiment, the Roman 5. So we joined one of your columns during the withdrawal. Thanks to the military engineer of the 3rd rank for ordering to take us in tow. The further events were told to me by the chief of our PRM military engineer of the 3rd rank AFALP, Alfarov, who was also here. Worried and stammering a little, he reported that the group headquarters, the Akka and the artillery depot were evacuated, and the 2 combat vehicles of the 4th group, taken in tow near Belaya Kalitva, were delayed as they could not move on their own. On the march they were shelled by enemy planes. The bullets hit the cylinder heads and penetrated them. This caused a hydraulic shock in the cooling system, and the water squeezed out the technological plugs of the cylinder blocks. The engines had to be replaced, but there were no spare engines in the PMA. Overnight the block heads were repaired. It remained to caulk the technological holes, but for this it was necessary to remove the engines, otherwise it was impossible to get to them. When the fascist tanks approached Novocherkassk, Lieutenant Colonel Yves Zhukov ordered the PRM to urgently withdraw to Rostov, and there to cross the Don. Only 2 vehicles of the 4th Guards Mortar Regiment could not move on their own, and there was nothing to tow them. Alfarov gave the command to the calculations to prepare the combat units for detonation. But it's easy to say to blow up the machines, each of which in 8 to 10 seconds could bring down 16 deadly shells on the enemy's head. After all, this is a salvo of a whole gun division. Therefore, after thinking, Alfarov ordered to cut plugs to close the technological holes. Together with the faulty installations were left flyer and half-truck. The rest of the vehicles of the repair shop, headed by the Commissar's senior political officer F. Novosad, went to the Rostov crossing. Commanders of combat vehicles opened boxes with explosives and just in case prepared the rigs for detonation. But here the first plugs are ready. They began to try them on and adjust them, and then to hammer them in. The plugs had to be hammered in tight so that they would not let the engine water through. Finally, the last plug is inserted. Water is poured in, but one of the plugs is leaking water. The plug is hammered in, but it does not go any further. It hits the wall of the block. It is replaced with another one. Water is poured again. Its level in the radiator neck does not go down. Under the approving cheers, the driver starts the car. Alfarov gives the engine full speed, keeping an eye on the radiator neck. To the joy of all, the cork withstood the test. The same was repeated with the second car. Both guns on the command of Alfarov went out on the road and fired a salvo through Novocherkassk at the enemy tanks, down the mountainside to the city. And now, after the volleys were made, in front of me stood the fighting vehicles of the glorious 4th Guards Mortar Regiment. In this unit I had a lot of good friends, loyal comrades. I remembered one of the best officers of the regiment, the Assistant Chief of Staff Captain V.S. Arkhipov, Chief of Regimental Intelligence Major Nikolai Korolov, Division Commander Major Borisov Chukov-Suvorov. Boris was an amazing man, brave, resourceful, strong-willed, energetic. His optimism never left him. He found a heartfelt word for everyone. Chukov-Suvorov was not only one of the best division commanders, but also a fiery agitator, an inspired poet. Later I learned from friends' letters that after Lt. Col. N.V. Vorobai of the regiment was commanded by I. N. Radchenko, and R.R. Vasilich became Chief of Staff of Zubanov's task force. I was pleased to learn that for the battles of Stalingrad 4 GMP was awarded the Order of Lenin. After all, I formed this regiment, commanded it when it gave the first volleys near Dikanka, and participated in many battles on the southwestern front. During the fighting at Stalingrad over the 4th Guards Mortar Regiment took patronage of the Komsomol and workers of Novosibirsk. In the organization of this patronage played a big role former Komsomol members of the city Borisov Chukov-Suvorov and Nikolai Korolov. They were in Novosibirsk hospital after being wounded. And having recovered, spoke before the workers of factories and youth, told about the military affairs of their regiment, about the battles of Stalingrad. That's when Novosibirsk Regional Party Committee and Regional Komsomol Committee decided to take patronage over the 4th Red Banner Guards Mortar Regiment. Fulfilling this decision, Novosibirsk citizens during the Battle of Stalingrad sent 138 volunteer communists to the regiment. They brought half-fur coats, valenki and other warm clothes, as well as many gifts from the workers of the city and region. The delegation of the city was headed by a prominent artist of Siberia VV, Titkov. The artist did not return to Novosibirsk, but stayed in the regiment. It was a fearless man. He did not miss an opportunity in the heat of battle to make sketches of his future paintings. In 1944, when the regiment was under repair near Moscow, he was given 24 combat vehicles with the inscription Novosibirsk Komsomolets. It was a gift from the workers and Komsomol members of Novosibirsk and the region. In 4 GMP regularly issued a multi-circulation newspaper Guardian, which was very much loved by the soldiers. One of its most active military correspondents was Major Boris Ovchakov-Suvorov. His passionate patriotic poems appeared in almost every issue of the regimental newspaper. My friends R.R. Vasilevich and I, N. Radchenko, who from the summer of 1944 became the head of the task force of the Third Baltic Front, wrote to me about all this. The threat loomed over Rostov. Not counting on heavy losses, the fascists were pushing the heroically fought troops of the 56th Army and managed to penetrate quite deeply into its defence. In some areas, in the Army's strip of the Guards, mortar units operated only one 14th separate division of sailors. On July 19, 1942, he took up a combat order on the outskirts of Rostov, which the enemy subjected to merciless bombing. On July 22nd at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, by the order of the artillery commander of the 56th Army, the division was tasked to take up a firing position near the airfield. At 15 o'clock the division was ready for battle. Intelligence, led by junior political officer Azerbaijov and Chief Petty Officer A.P. Shustov reported. P. Shustov reported that in the village of Red Crimea our enemy tanks, battery of Senior Lieutenant D.N. Beryashvili, opened fire on the advancing Nazis. The first attack was repulsed, but the silence did not last long. Exactly at 20:00, Abizov transmitted a radiogram: "The enemy tanks are approaching us." And a few minutes later he already asked to open fire on his observation post. An avalanche of enemy tanks was coming to Rostov. One by one fascist bombers were flying towards the city. Moskvin gave a command to the division, and the shells raced towards the enemy. That's when the Guards' lessons of direct fire came in handy. The sailors expected that the enemy planes would drop all their bomb load on the division's positions. After all, Junkers flew over them more than 3 dozen. But the unforeseen happened. The bombers, apparently frightened by the fiery comets fired by our Katyushas, abruptly changed course, flew away and did not show themselves until the next morning. And where the enemy's tanks were walling in, now the black smoke was rising high into the sky, the fires of burning vehicles were blazing. Abizov and his battle friends, fortunately, remained alive. The division withdrew to the reserve positions. Battery NMM Pavliuk, which had a reserve of shells for one more volley, covered the withdrawal, and when Pavliuk withdrew he was covered by another battery from the reserve positions. Nazi tanks stopped and opened fire on the batteries. At dusk the sailors hit the enemy vehicles with anti-tank rifles, orienting themselves by the flashes of shots. This duel continued until late at night. The commander of the 56th Army ordered the Guards to withdraw behind the Don. However, Moskvin and Yurovsky convinced him that the division could still continue the fight. Later, General Reshov sent Moskvin and Yurovsky with a liaison officer a letter that said, "I greet in your person the glorious Guards Mortar Division of sailors. They solved their tasks heroically. They are true sons of our motherland. In the battles for Rostov-on-Don the division laid down a lot of the sworn enemy. Fight for the motherland. Beat Hitlerites mercilessly." Major General Rizov, commander of the 56th Army. For this and subsequent battles near Rostov-on-Don, for the battles in the Salsky Steppes and the Caucasus Mountains, the division of sailors was awarded the Order of the Red Banner. The 8th Guards Mortar Regiment of Lieutenant Colonel Lobanov also supported the troops retreating to Rostov with its fire. On July 22, 1942, I arrived in this regiment. The headquarters of the regiment with one division was on the northeastern outskirts of Rostov, in a grove. I was met by the Chief of Staff, Major X. A. Marion, a tall, swarthy officer with the Order of the Red Star on his faded uniform. He graduated from the Tbilisi Artillery School in 1931. In the same year, he became a communist. Marion received his baptism of fire in the battles with the Japanese invaders at Lake Khasan. I had no time to look around, as fascist airplanes flew into the grove where we were. Guardsmen had not yet dug slots and ramps for fighting vehicles, and we were all, of course, in great danger. Junkers with a raw dive over the location of the headquarters of the regiment and division. From the very first days of the war, one had to be under bombardment, under artillery and mortar fire more than once. It would seem that it was time to get used to it, but it is impossible to get used to it. Who claims that he is used to it, that he does not know the feeling of fear, crooked soul. Everyone can have fear, regardless of ranks and titles. The main thing is to be able to overcome it. There was a piercing whistle, which made everyone standing on the ground and pressed as tightly as possible. Someone fell on top of me, sprawled out. Someone was thrown back by the blast wave. The thought flashed through my mind. Raising my heavy head, I recognized Major Marion. "Are you wounded?" "Lie down, Comrade Colonel." "I'm all right," he answered calmly. The raid was over. We were all covered with earth, thrown by the force of the explosion from the closest crater. It was noisy in our ears. We stood up, shook ourselves off, and were humanly happy that we were unharmed. "And yet what happened to you?" I asked Marion. "Comrade Colonel," he said, somewhat embarrassed, "if we did not have time to dig trenches, our duty is to cover our commander with our chests." I firmly shook hands with the major. July 23rd, the Nazis broke into Rostov. Brutal street battles began. Over the city continuously circled enemy planes, bombing the railroad bridge and pontoon crossing near the grain elevator, leading through the Green Island on the left bank of the Don. In these sultry July days, the city was shrouded in a smoky haze of fires. There was nothing to breathe. The streets leading to the pontoon bridge were clogged with refugees, wagons of retreating units. The flow of people moved harshly, insistently, silently. The order instructed the front troops to first of all transfer the Guards' mortar units to the left bank of the Don. On July 22nd and 23, 43rd, 49th, 67th Guards mortar regiments and 101st Separate Division crossed to the left bank of the Don through Aksiskaya, Bagaevskaya and Melikovskaya crossings. From the left bank, these units covered the withdrawal and crossing of our troops. During 3 days, 2 divisions of the 49th Guards Mortar Regiment delayed the enemy near the village Sasatsky. The divisions destroyed up to a battalion of infantry, destroyed 3 crossings built by the enemy, hit and burned hundreds of vehicles. On July 23rd, the 8th Guards Mortar Regiment and the 14th Marine Division remained in the city. The front headquarters and the headquarters of the 56th and 12th Armies were on the move. It was impossible to establish communication with them. Pontoon crossing, although subjected to enemy air raids, but was not yet damaged. With great difficulty, by the end of the day on July 23rd, the 8th Regiment was ferried to the left bank. In accordance with the combat order of the front commander, it became operationally subordinate to the 18th Army. The column of the remaining vehicles of our headquarters was led by an officer of the 8th Regiment, a native of the city of Rostov, through the alleys to the bank of the Don. Moving then along the bank, we came to the pontoon bridge. At the crossing we met Moskvin and Yurovsky. "All shells were used up in the battle. The division is making its way to the crossing," Moskvin reported. After a while, the first vehicles of the division appeared. Thanks to the friendly and organized actions of Sailor's column of vehicles, and combat units crossed relatively quickly. Now all our units were on the left bank. I reported about it to a member of the Military Council of the Front, Divisional Commissar I. Larin, who was at the pontoon bridge. "This is good," said Larin. "Now you, Comrade Nestorenko, will have to lead the crossing, and Lomakovsky will be the commissar." To tell you the truth, I was not happy with the task. After all, I had to deal with the organization of combat mortar units. But Larin resolutely repeated, "You'll lead the crossing. Sailors from the Azov flotilla will soon arrive on boats at your disposal. Meet them and give them a task." So me and Lomakovsky had to lead the Rostov crossing. The commander of the 14th Division of Sailors Moskvin was ordered to allocate a group of 10 people headed by Lt. M. Biskupski at my disposal. In about 30 minutes, about 60 sailors of the Azov flotilla arrived on boats. They were headed by Chief Petty Officer Ya. F. Blinov. As soon as the sailors unloaded and lined up on the sandy shore, I addressed them with a short speech. Comrades sailors, a member of the Military Council of the Front has set us the task to eliminate the traffic jam as soon as possible, to ensure continuous movement at the crossing. To do this, we must block all side streets and alleys, do not allow to wedge into the central stream. I selected 5 tall sailors and ordered them to strictly monitor the order at the entrance to the crossing. In about 20 minutes the traffic jam was eliminated, and the pontoon bridge resumed uninterrupted traffic. So it went on all night. As we expected, with dawn began group raids junkers. They dive on the crossing, dropped bombs on defenseless people, the accumulation of cars and military equipment. Fuel tanks were burning, shells on ammunition cars were bursting. Sailors heroically extinguished the burning vehicles, dragged them aside with tractors and tanks, clearing the way. In order to somehow cover the pontoon bridge from dive bombers, we decided to set fire to a warehouse with sunflower seeds, which was close to the shore. Immediately, a huge black cloud of smoke rose, which for several hours covered the bridge with a dense smoke screen. The crossing was in continuous operation. During the smoke screen, there were no direct hits on the pontoons. However, the warehouse burned and the smoke dissipated. The bombs began to burst closer and closer. Shrapnel from one of them killed 3 sailors and mortally wounded Chief Petty Officer Blinov. I was slightly wounded too. A bomb fragment broke my index finger on my right hand and split my cheekbone. On the bridge again formed a traffic jam. The road was blocked by a flaming Z5 truck. We decided to push it aside with a tank, but it was not so easy. As soon as the tank hit the burning car, its engine suddenly stopped. The tanker was confused and did not know what to do. Sailors came to his aid. They helped him with advice and deeds. Finally, the tank backed up. Then it moved forward with a rapid jerk, rammed the car, dragged it to the side. All that was left of the burning truck, the sailors extinguished. The crossing resumed. Severely wounded Chief Petty Officer Ya. F. Blinov asked Lieutenant Biskupski to call me. I approached him. In a weakened voice, Blinov said, "Comrade Colonel, I'm dying, let me embrace you. Avenge me." His hand fell powerlessly. "Tell my sailors, tell them beat them. Hateful bastards. Avenge my mother's grief." I leaned over to him, hugged and kissed him, barely holding back tears. At the same time, bombs continued to explode at the crossing. The walls of the grain elevator shuddered from the explosions. At the very entrance to the bridge, the road was destroyed. There were huge potholes and a deep rut filled with water. With great difficulty, we managed to cover the potholes with sheets of boiler iron stacked near the elevator. Movement of people and military equipment on the pontoon bridge continued until 6 o'clock in the evening on July 24th. Thanks to the heroic efforts of the sailors of the Azov flotilla, the crossing worked almost without interruption, despite the junkers' raids. Self-sacrifice, determination and courage were shown by many sailors. Among them were Chief Petty Officer Blinov, Midshipman Bobrov, Petty Officer of the First Article Ovechkin, Lieutenant Biskupski, Senior Technician Lieutenant Kostylov, and many others. About 6 o'clock in the evening, during a massive raid of junkers, the pontoon bridge was destroyed in several places. It was now impossible to restore it. The traffic stopped. We announced to all those who were waiting that we had to cross with improvised means. At 19 o'clock on July 24th, an officer arrived by boat from the front commander, Lieutenant General R.Y.Y. Pai Malinovsky. He handed me the following note: "Comrade Nestorenko, leave the crossing, arrive at Michatinskaya. Malinovsky, 24.VII.42. We loaded the seriously wounded who were in the elevator onto the boat and sent them across the Don. Colonel Lomakovsky, Lieutenant Biskupski and I crossed the wreckage of the bridge with great difficulty to Zeleny Island, and then to the left bank of the Don. Not far from the crossing among the dead, we recognized General Cherniev. We took his documents and orders, and the body, accompanied by Lieutenant Biskupski, was sent to Mechitinskaya. In the morning of July 25th, we reached Zhukovo-Tavricheskoye, where the headquarters of the 8th Guards Mortar Regiment was located. From there we went by car of the regiment commander to the front commander, who was in the village of Mechitinskaya. In the afternoon of July 25th, 1942, IN, Lomakovsky and I finally reached my headquarters, which, like the front headquarters, was located in the village of Mechitinskaya. The Chief of Staff LT, Cole, GV, Osmolovsky showed us on the map where the 8th, 43rd, 49th Regiments, the 14th and 101st separate divisions, the artillery depot and PRM were located by that time, reported on the condition of the units and their supply with shells and fuel. The 67th Regiment had not been contacted, and the headquarters had no information about it. Having received the necessary information, Lomakovsky and I immediately went to report to the commander. RIEA, Malinovsky, members of the Military Council I. Larin and L.R. Korniak and Chief of Staff of the Front A.I. Antonov with great attention listened to our report on the events at the crossing and the state of the Guards mortar units of the front. General Malinovsky briefly introduced us to the situation at the front. The enemy with tank and motorized units is forcing the Don, coming to the operational space at the junction of our and southwestern fronts. We have no mechanized and tank reserves, little artillery, aviation, tanks. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, I made a proposal, which we dearly discussed with Lomakovsky. Its essence was as follows. I proposed to oppose the enemy's tank and motorized columns with mobile troops, and first of all with Guards mortar units. With their maneuver and massive volley fire, they will be able to delay and disperse enemy columns in this flat terrain, destroy it in areas of concentration. From our regiments can quickly assemble a group of 60 combat vehicles, one volley of which will amount to about 1,000 shells. On the Menich Channel we managed to take to Salsk more than 10,000 shells M13 and 6,000 shells M8. The units are combat ready, I finished. To cover them should be given small arms units, planted on vehicles, anti-tank and anti-aircraft weapons, if any. We will discuss your proposal, after a little thought, said the commander. And while this issue will be resolved, have a snack and rest in the next room. An hour later, 2 hours later, we were awakened, and General A.I. Antonov handed me a combat order, according to which was to form a mobile group, and I was appointed its commander. The group consisted of the 176th Infantry Division, 8th, 43rd, 49th Guards Mortar Regiments, 14th Independent Guards Mortar Division, a separate tank battalion, anti-aircraft artillery, motor transport. Instructing me, R.W. Malinovsky said, "Do not lose time, Act. Report to us on the progress of the formation of the mobile group. I wish you success." General A.I. Antonov added that the orders to the Chief of the Rear and the commander of the 176th Infantry Division, Colonel Iowa Rubeniuk, already given. Having given the necessary orders, late in the evening Lomakovsky, Captain Smirnov, Ensign Bobrov, Senior Lieutenant Liso Ivan, head of radio communications, with radio operators and radio station RB, we left in 2 cars to the headquarters of the 176th Infantry Division in the village of Dokhny, located 40 kilometers northwest of Mechitinskaya. By the time we arrived at the division headquarters, the commanders and commissars of the units that were part of the mobile group, according to the combat order, had arrived. The combat order of the front headquarters was read to the assembled. Then they heard brief reports from the commanders on the condition and provision of the units. These reports were also necessary for mutual acquaintance of commanders, which contributed to better interaction in battle. In setting the task, I emphasized that the commanders are required to take initiative and selfless action, mutual aid, continuous communication between the units and the division headquarters. To facilitate the management of motorized convoys on the march and in battle, I demanded that by morning on the sides of all vehicles was applied a single conventional identification sign, the Roman 5, that is, the same sign that had all the Guards mortar units of our front. Then, in the dynamics of the battle, it helped us a lot. The functions of the headquarters of the mobile group was to perform the headquarters of the 176th Rifle Division. I appointed as my deputy the commander of this division, Colonel Rubaniuk. During the short July night, we had to put on cars 2 rifle regiments of the division and support services, to complete with vehicles artillery regiment of the division. At 2 o'clock in the morning of July 26th, we reported to the front headquarters that the 8th, 49th GMP, 14th OGMDM, and 2 anti-aircraft divisions were concentrated in the areas indicated to them. 2 rifle regiments were put on vehicles. A few minutes later, in response to the radio received an order, the mobile group immediately go on the route Mechetinskaya, Telina, Salsk, Proletarskaya. Cover the crossing of the Menik Channel in the area of Proletarskaya. On the right wing of the front, there was a very difficult situation. The enemy managed to force the Don in several places. His tanks and mechanized columns were moving rapidly in the direction of Bolshaya Orlovka, Budnovskaya, Proletarskaya. It created a threat to the rear and headquarters of the Southern Front, the rear and headquarters of the 9th Army. Fulfilling the order, the mobile group consisting of 2 rifle regiments on vehicles, 2 regiments and 1 division of the SMH, Art Regiment of the division and 2 anti-aircraft divisions at 6 a.m. on July 26, 1942, took the specified route. There was a heavy march ahead. The enemy had absolute dominance in the air. To reduce losses from air raids, we moved on several parallel roads, keeping the distance between the vehicles. Despite the frequent massive raids, the mobile group, covered by the fire of anti-aircraft divisions, by the end of the day on July 26th, crossed the Menik Canal, passed the village of Proletarskaya, and came to the line of farms Privolny, Polivanov, Donskoy. Sent in the direction of Budnovskaya village and Beketny farm 2 advanced detachments by the morning of July 27th, engaged in a battle with the enemy reconnaissance and vanguards. The movement of the enemy vanguards was stopped. Our reconnaissance established the concentration of tanks and motorized infantry of the enemy in the gullies and forest landings southeast of the village Budnovskaya and south of the farm Beketny. It was clear that at dawn the Germans would go on the offensive. Having specified on maps the places of concentration of Hitlerites, we decided to give a massive volley before dawn. In order to realize this sudden attack, the firing positions of the Katyushas had to be located on the line of our guard. Divisions went to the positions at night. The vehicles moved without headlights, in total darkness, observing the strictest order and silence. We outlined hidden and most convenient access roads and ways of withdrawal of vehicles from firing positions after the salvo. Before the batteries went to the firing positions, we set up a combat guard with machine guns and anti-tank guns. It was no less difficult at night to aim the combat vehicles at targets in close proximity to the enemy. In the fire raid participated 28 units from the 8th GMP, 20 units from the 49th GMP, and 10 units from the 14th OGMDM. A total of 58 combat vehicles. Their salvo totaled 928 M13 shells. Approximately an equal number of installations were aimed at each area of concentration of the Nazis. The commanders of the units, Lieutenant Colonels Lobanov, Sukushia, Lieutenant Captain Moskvin, successfully accomplished the task. At 3 hours 30 minutes on July 27, 1942, a volley was given simultaneously by all 58 installations. The sudden and powerful blow stunned the enemy. In the areas of fire raids broke out pockets of fires. The fascists began to retreat indiscriminately. It was decided to pursue the enemy and go to the line Budenovskaya village, farm Beketny. The results of the fire raid and their decision were reported to the front headquarters. But in response they received the following order: suspend the pursuit. To cover the crossing near Proletarskaya, leave a reinforced battalion. The group immediately move out along the route Salsk, Telina, Klobodany, Malo Kuznetsovka. Take the defense at the line Bezvodny, Krasny Luch, Popov. This meant that the mobile group had to urgently return to the area of Mechetinskaya. As it turned out later, in the morning of July 27th, the enemy with large tank and mechanized forces threw back the units of the 37th Army, defending the crossing of the Menik River in the area of Visly, forced the Menik Channel and developed the offensive in the direction of Mechetinskaya, Telina, again creating a threat to the rear and the headquarters of the front. Therefore, the front command decided to close the gap between the 12th and 37th Armies at the line of Novo-Kuznetsovka, Popov. To do this, the mobile group had to make a return 120-kilometer march and reach the specified boundary. In order to gain time and to ensure the exit of parts of the mobile group on the defence line, we decided to send forward the 14th Division of AP Moskvin and 58th Division of VD Sidorov with reinforcement as a covering detachment. ED Sidorov with reinforced reconnaissance. They were assigned the task of volley fire divisions to delay the advance of the enemy. The reconnaissance sent from the divisions by the end of the day on July 28 established that the defence line indicated in the combat order of the front headquarters was occupied by the enemy. 10 tanks and 15 vehicles were found in Novo-Kuznetsovka, about 20 tanks and 20 to 25 vehicles with infantry in Popov. By battery volleys from open positions by direct fire, further advance of tanks and infantry of the enemy to the south was stopped. Here is what P. Moskvin told about this battle. Intelligence reported that a column of enemy tanks and motorized infantry was moving along the road. We chose a position at the bend of the road so that our batteries could simultaneously fire on the enemy column. Motorcyclists appeared, followed by cars and tanks. At a signal, all the batteries opened fire. The column was covered with battery volleys to its full depth. Shot down and smoking cars stopped on them as if blind tanks swooped down on them, crushed them under themselves and caught fire. The surviving fascists ran out of the clouds of smoke and dust. In the smoking column of the enemy, suddenly there were 2 powerful explosions. Perhaps it exploded fuel tanks or cars with ammunition. Further movement of the enemy along this road was suspended. In the same way, Katyusha divisions stopped enemy columns on other roads. The actions of the 14th and 58th Divisions allowed our mobile group to reach the line Malo-Kuznetsovka, Novostroyka, and during July 29th, to hold off the enemy onslaught. During this day, the Guards divisions replenished the stock of shells, and the regiments of the division pulled up the lagging units. At 19 o'clock, Moskvin reported that the enemy column of up to 40 tanks was moving to Meshetinskaya. A volley was fired at the column. 5 tanks went up in flames. The rest withdrew in the northwestern direction. On July 30th, as soon as the sun rose and the fog cleared, fascist planes appeared in the air. They circled over our fighting orders, dive-bombed and bombed. 2 dive bombers were shot down by the friendly fire of anti-aircraft divisions. This forced the enemy planes to fly at high altitudes. The effectiveness of bombing sharply decreased. Frontal attacks of the enemy stopped, but his tanks went to bypass our flanks. On July 30th, about 30 enemy tanks from the west approached Meshetinskaya. Units of the 18th Army began to withdraw to the south. For us, there was a threat of encirclement. We made a decision with the onset of darkness to withdraw and take the defence at the line Kloborobny, Klobodany, Mikhailovka, 14th and 58th Divisions to cover the left flank, 49th Regiment the right flank, 2 divisions of the 8th Regiment to cover the withdrawal from the front. At night, an officer arrived from the front headquarters with an order from the commander about the withdrawal of our mobile group to a new line of defence, exactly on the one we had outlined. And although we now had the right to withdraw, the mood was anxious. It rained all night, the dirt roads were soaked, and our motorized convoys could not move. Fortunately, in the morning the rain stopped, a fresh steppe breeze blew, and the roads began to dry up. The engines began to hum. Individual vehicles began to move, though with difficulty, and then the whole column. However, by dawn the rifle regiments of the division did not have time to occupy the defence line. In the air again appeared enemy planes, and on the flanks groups of fascist tanks. They were moving from Igolikskaya to Telina. Katyusha salvos rang out. Guards mortar divisions, covering the flanks, entered the battle. Bravely, clearly, decisively acted division of sailors. The commander of the division, Lieutenant Captain A.P. Moskvin, and Commissar Battalion Commissar E.Y. Yurovsky had some amazing intuition. They perfectly felt the situation and the rhythm of the battle. The battery commanders of this remarkable division, N.M. Pavliuk, D.N. Beryashvili, Afeti, Spoyev, acted skillfully and boldly. In the division was perfectly organized mobile reconnaissance, fast, good camouflage. Hiding in ravines, gullies, bushes, corn or sunflower fields, at the right moment the combat units jumped out into the open, direct fire volleys and immediately went into hiding. Moskvin applied his own way of correcting fire, which soon became the property of other divisions. One day, driving up to the firing position of the 14th Division, I saw such a picture. At the left flank fighting vehicle the truss was raised to the ground, and on the very top of the rails, putting a tarpaulin cover under himself, sat Moskvin. Yurovsky, the division commissar, reported to me that the commander was personally conducting observation and correcting the division's fire on enemy tanks and motorized infantry. After a while Moskvin, tanned, excited, got off the guides, quickly came to me and clearly reported. "Comrade Colonel, the attack has been repulsed. We set fire to 5 vehicles and 3 tanks that were moving in a column along the road." Then regretfully added, "It is a shame that our shells have a large dispersion, and the installations do not allow to let the enemy at close range. It is a pity that there are not enough shells in the division. We have to fire with separate installations. If we were to give a divisional salvo, it would be a different result." I thanked Moskvin for brave actions and asked him to pass my gratitude to all soldiers of the unit. Sailors forced Hitlerites to withdraw and covered the road from Igolikskaya to Telina. Before receiving the order from the front headquarters, we had to keep the defense on the line of Selina and not to let the enemy to Salsk. Continuous battles, long marches and sleepless nights greatly tired the personnel of the mobile group, especially the drivers. Under the pressure of fascist tanks pursuing the mobile group, the regiments of the 176th Rifle Division could not hold on the outskirts of Telina and withdrew to the river Sredny Egolik. The 8th and 49th Guards Mortar regiments and the 14th Marine Division took the brunt of the defence of Telina. The fire of the divisions of the 49th Regiment was adjusted from the roofs of buildings located on the northwestern outskirts of Telina by the Chief of Staff, Major Yakushev. The fire of the divisions of the 8th Regiment was directed by the regimental commander, Lieutenant Colonel Labanov, and the Chief of Staff, Major Marion. Firing from closed positions, the divisions repulsed the attack of enemy tanks from the north. And at 15 o'clock on July 31st, up to 20 tanks attacked us from the southwest, from the farms Proletarsky and Samarsky. Hitlerites tried to cut off ways of withdrawal to the south to the 8th and 49th Regiments. Transferred to the southwestern outskirts of Selina Division of the 8th Regiment under the command of Captain N.V. Skurda hit 3 tanks with a volley from an open position. The rest sharply changed direction, turned around and quickly moved back to the farms. The battle near Telina lasted for several hours. Radio communication with the front headquarters and the headquarters of the GMCH group was interrupted. We were waiting for the arrival of the liaison officers Captain A. P. Borodankov and Capt. P. Borodankov and Captain N.A. Smirnov. Both had packets with a combat order, which indicated the direction of departure of our group. We never waited for Captain Borodankov. The U-2 airplane on which he was flying was shot down near the State Farm Gigant and burning fell on the territory occupied by the enemy. This was reported to me by Major Yakushev, Chief of Staff of the 49th Regiment. Captain Smirnov, who left by car, also did not appear. Meanwhile, the enemy attacked more and more actively from different sides, trying to bypass us from the flanks and break through to Selsk. At 17 o'clock on July 31st, enemy tanks, hiding behind plantations, stealthily entered the zone, not affected by the fire of our divisions. Single tanks broke through to the northeastern outskirts of Selina and sought to cut the road to Salsk. We had to give the 49th Regiment a command to withdraw south, cross the Sredny Egolik River, support the defence of the 176th Rifle Division, and cover the withdrawal of the divisions of the 8th Regiment. Finally, the communications officer Smirnov arrived and reported that the front headquarters had left Salsk. The artillery depot of the GMCH had been evacuated. We were offered to withdraw immediately to the frontiers Sredny Egolik, Lapanka, Tatsin. Leaving the last Telina, we with Labanov right on the road deployed the closing battery and gave a direct volley at the Nazi tanks. The distance to the place of concentration of Hitlerites was less than the minimum sight, and most of the shells were flying over, but some of them still exploded in the target area. Deploying the battery on direct aiming, we did not notice how 2 German tanks, covered by a railway embankment, approached us at a distance of 300 to 400 meters. They opened machine gun fire. The drivers of our vehicles showed exceptional restraint. After the volley, they turned their rigs 180 degrees and quickly took them out of the fire. Lobanov and I were on the step of the last car. When we approached the crossing at Tatsin, the division of the 49th Regiment gave a salvo on the southeastern outskirts of Telina, from where the enemy tanks were coming out. By the fire of the 49th Regiment, further advance of the Nazi tanks was stopped. However, soon the enemy managed to capture the station Sredny Igolik. There was a threat to our left flank. I contacted Moskvin by radio and ordered him to throw back the enemy. Moskvin had already sent forward reconnaissance by automobile, and the division on the field roads followed it. Night was coming. The way Katyusha was illuminated by the torch of the burning grain elevator. We met refugees who said that German tanks were close. Some of them had allegedly gone to Belaya Glina and Razvolnoye. It turned out that the division goes in the bag, but Moskvin did not change the direction of movement. He hoped for his reconnaissance, but was ready, like Commissar Yurovsky, for any surprises. Moskvin and Yurovsky rode on the footplate of the lead car, holding hand grenades in the pockets of their bushlats. At last the reconnaissance team appeared. It had already selected combat positions and prepared data for firing on the cluster of enemy tanks. The division's salvo was placed successfully. Now the sailors had the task to ride the road and prevent enemy tanks from entering the village of Peshenokskaya. The division positioned itself in the landings. For direct fire under the front wheels of the combat unit's sailors undermined the ground. Reconnaissance settled in a kilometre from the combat positions on the crest of a small hill. Communication with the scouts was maintained by radio and marine semaphore. Here appeared the tanks, coming in a deployed formation. Gave a volley of one installation. The tank in front was shrouded in smoke, stopped, the rest turned back. About 40 minutes later, the tank attack resumed, but was again repulsed. The third time the tanks appeared from the flank, camouflaged by bushes. They were spotted by the guards and opened fire on them. The surviving enemy tanks retreated back into the gully. So the division of sailors thwarted several attempts of Hitlerites to pass to Peshenokopskaya. However, the onslaught of the enemy did not weaken. The reconnaissance again reported about the approach of tanks. They were moving at full speed along the road, shooting at our scouts who were leaving by cars. Beriashvili's battery gave a volley. But this time it was not quite successful. Other batteries, because of lack of shells, could not enter the battle. Quite unexpectedly, the 58th Division of Captain Sidorov came to the aid of the sailors and fired a salvo at the attacking enemy tanks. Several vehicles caught fire. The rest slowed down, changed direction, but continued to move to Peshenokopskaya with a wide deployed front. They needed shells. A platoon of ammunition was sent to Razvolnoye for them. It had to return through Peshenokopskaya, but enemy tanks were already entering there. What to do? Moskvin gave Lieutenant Petrov the task to rush through Peshenokopskaya in a semi-truck at maximum speed and warn the platoon of ammunition. In a few minutes, Petrov, with scouts as a whirlwind, rushed through the village in full view of the amazed Hitlerites. 10 cars with ammunition, approaching Peshenokopskaya, turned to another road, bypassing the village, and safely arrived at the division. Sailors were in intense fighting for the 8th day, and it was decided to give them a break. On the night of August 2nd, the division arrived at the place of rest. In the morning they put in order the material part and vehicles. And a little later the commander and the commissar of the division gathered the guardsmen to talk about the past battles, to point out the shortcomings in the actions of the batteries, to note those who had distinguished themselves. The names of Junior Sergeants N.K., Glinin, I.A., Drankov, Red Fleet I, Isaev, who had repeatedly brought their units to direct fire under fierce artillery fire and enemy bombing, were mentioned. Sergeant V.F. Rosakin, Red Fleet gunner PD Shadrinov and loader PT. Anpilov took out from under fire several vehicles, including the combat unit. At the same time, Anpilov hit a German tank with an anti-tank gun. Senior Sergeant VV Gagarin, under enemy fire, repaired damage in the electrical wiring of the combat vehicle and fired 2 direct-fire salvos. In all divisions told about the courage of Staff Sergeant Iskakov Orumbai Iskakovich. Under heavy bombardment he reloaded the fighting vehicle at the waiting position and under artillery fire brought it to the firing line. Despite the heavy fighting, the mood of the sailors was cheerful, fighting. They even organized an amateur art concert. Waltz Chechetka performed by the Chief of Staff of the division, Senior Lieutenant and Vinogradov, Lieutenant E.M. Biskupski, imitating the artist Henkin, Red Night at the Cottage, and Seeing in the Air Messa changed the ending. Instead of the words Somewhere Jazz played, he read Messerschmitt Flew In, which caused friendly laughter. Then they sang Katyusha in chorus. I was told about this amateur concert by Regimental Commissar Drozhdin, who was in the division at that time. The right flank of the mobile group was covered by the 271st Division of Captain L.P. Kashkin. In the battle near the farm Pulanski, which is 7 kilometers from Razvolnoye, bravely acted Battery Senior Lieutenant I. L. Koifmana. It took up firing positions to the south of the farm. The sun was scorching mercilessly. Wherever you looked, everywhere stretched a silent steppe, in some places crossed by gullies with sparse bushes. The battery camouflaged and froze. On the roofs of the farmhouses and trees near them observers settled down. Soon they noticed that the enemy tanks and motorized infantry approached the village Nikolevskaya. The combat vehicles were aimed at the target, which was well observed and was in reach. At the command of the battery commander, the units fired a salvo at the enemy. Columns of black smoke rose into the white-hot sky, and in a few minutes groups of tanks began to come out of the village and descend into the gully. Obviously, the fascists decided to secretly approach the battery and attack it. This detour maneuver was first noticed by Guards Private Levin. He shouted, "The tanks are bypassing us from behind. They are coming out of the gully." The battery commander ordered the flank gun to turn towards the tanks. To reduce the angle of aim, the machine ran its rear wheels on the sloping slope of the mound. This maneuver was quickly and clearly performed by Lieutenant Alexei Bartanev and the commander of the fighting vehicle Smirnov with his crew. The tanks noticed the movement on the battery and sharply increased their speed. Having turned in a line conducting gun and machine gun fire, they went on the attack. Mortally wounded fell Lieutenant Bartanev, was wounded and gun commander Smirnov. When the nearest tank was about 200 meters away, Guardsman Ozhanov, Kuznetsov, Suprinov, Kilik, driver Fomin opened direct fire. 16 shells exploded. Tanks were shrouded in smoke. 2 of them stopped, the rest quickly turned around, and at high speed withdrew to the beam. There were no more attacks. After the battle in the twilight of the passing day, Guards buried Alyosha Bartanev, and he was only 19. During these battles, the interaction of the Guards' mortar divisions, artillery and rifle units acquired new forms. For example, a combat group consisting of the 269th Division of the 49th GMP, anti-aircraft and anti-tank batteries, and a company of motorized infantry was formed. This group was headed by the commander of the 269th GMD, Captain P.P. Puzik. Maneuverable and powerful in fire, this combat group in the battles near Peshinokopskaya and Belaya Glina repulsed several enemy attacks, destroyed more than 15 tanks and about 35 vehicles. Skillfully combining the fire of the GMCH division with the fire of anti-tank and anti-aircraft batteries, Puzik's group inflicted great damage to the enemy. The salvo fire of the batteries of the SMF division disorganized the attacking tanks and destroyed the Hitlerites' motorized infantry, and the direct fire of the anti-tank and anti-aircraft batteries on the close approaches hit single tanks that tried to attack the group's fighting order. Using the tactic of successive withdrawal to intermediate lines of defense and mutual fire cover, this group in the performance of combat tasks and when leaving the threat of encirclement had relatively small losses. Here it is impossible not to say that in the middle of July, reflecting the attempts of the Germans to cross the Seversky Donets near Kamensk, the 269th Division, led by Captain Puzik, for 3 days held back the fierce onslaught of the enemy. Combat calculations of the division hit and set on fire about 200 vehicles, 15 tanks. About 1,000 Hitlerite soldiers and officers were killed and wounded by the fire of the division. Divisions of the 49th Guards Mortar Division, under the command of Captains Puzik, Smirnov, Kashkin during the actions in the Mobile Group, as well as the 14th Separate Guards Mortar Division of Sailors, covered themselves with unfading glory. The advance of enemy tanks and motorized infantry was suspended. Regiments of the 176th Infantry Division took up the defence along the crest of the uplands at the line of Belaya Glina, Razvalnoy. In the village of Belaya Glina we managed to establish communication with the units of the 12th Army, which were occupying the defence on our left. The front temporarily stabilised. The headquarters of the Mobile Group was located in Zhukovsky. The actions of the Mobile Group had its own peculiarities. From the front headquarters by radio and through the liaison officers we received information from air reconnaissance about the direction of movement of enemy columns. In these directions we sent out reconnaissance in vehicles, followed by Katyusha divisions with infantry mounted on vehicles and anti-tank batteries. On detected enemy columns, Katyusha opened salvo fire. The infantry and anti-tank batteries occupied the defence, blocking the roads along which the Nazis were following, and covered the fighting order of the Guards divisions. If the enemy appeared on the flanks, the infantry and anti-tank batteries under cover of fire of divisions withdrew to the next line. There they deployed in combat order and covered the withdrawal of the divisions. This plan of interaction was proposed on the day of formation of the Mobile Group and was successfully implemented in battle. Waging rearguard fighting, the Mobile Group was divided into two parts. 176th Rifle Division with 49th GMP and 2 divisions of 8 GMP under the command of Rubaniuk withdrew to Nalchik and Ordzhonikidze. 14th Marine Division, 58th Division of 8 GMP withdrew to Armaver, Maikop, Belorikinskaya. In the same direction with the troops of the Southern Front retreated the 48th and 101st Separate Guards Mortar Divisions M8, 1 division of 2 GMP, 2 divisions of 67 GMP, and 3 divisions of 25 GMP. Despite the very short period of formation of the Mobile Group, the limited amount of ammunition in the artillery and mortar units that were part of it, the group with its manoeuvring actions and volley fire managed to delay the advance of German tank and mechanized columns, which had entered the operational space in the gap between the southern and southwestern fronts at the line Budanovskaya, Beketny, and then for 3 days delayed the enemy in the defence area between the 12th and 37th Armies. Not a single frontal attack of enemy tanks, and even more so of motorised infantry against the volley fire of the Guards mortar units, did not reach the target. Only flank detours and strikes forced the Mobile Group to withdraw to other lines. After Katyusha salvos, the enemy tanks, as a rule, stopped, changed the direction of movement, began to rush in different directions, becoming good targets for anti-tank artillery. Guards mortar units, which became the basis of the Mobile Group, was a manoeuvrable and powerful artillery means of reinforcement. Delaying the enemy, they reduced the pace of his offensive. It was perhaps the only case in the history of military operations when the main burden in the fight against tanks and motorized infantry of the enemy took the Guards mortar units, and the rifle units were subordinated to the head of the task force of the front. During the period of heavy defensive battles of the Southern Front troops, the Mobile Group fulfilled the task assigned to it, providing decisive opposition to the enemy's motorized and tank columns. From July 25th to August 2nd, 1942, when I headed the Mobile Group with Colonel A. Rubaniuk and Regimental Commissar N. Lomakovsky, the staff of the front's GMCH operative group, headed by Lieutenant Colonel G.V. Osmolovsky, and a member of the military council of the group, Regimental Commissar M.I. Drozhajain were at the front's VPU and led the Guards mortar units that were not part of the Mobile Group. These were the 43rd and 67th Guards Mortar Regiments, 101st and 48th Separate Divisions, and Division 2 GMP of the Southern Front, 25th, 18th, and 19th GMP of the North Caucasus Front. The headquarters of the task force kept in touch with the units, monitored their combat operations, took care of supplying the units with shells and fuel. On the basis of the decision of the front command, it gave combat orders for reassignment. In the course of combat operations, the Guard's mortar units were constantly being transferred from one section of the front to another, more responsible. During the fighting in the Salish Steppes and in the Kuban, the Military Council of the Operational Group of the GMCH Front simultaneously led the Guard's mortar units and the Mobile Group. The headquarters of the Mobile Group kept in touch with the headquarters of the Front and the GMCH Task Force by radio. However, because of the frequent relocation of headquarters, there were interruptions in radio communication, and there were no duplicate stations. Communications officers sent by automobile arrived, as a rule, with great delay. However, 2 U-2 liaison airplanes were assigned to the Mobile Group. One of them quickly went out of service. On the second constantly flew communications officer Captain A.P. Borodankov. But even this airplane Hitlerites managed to shoot down, after which our communication with the front headquarters became even worse. All this led to the fact that we did not receive some orders and combat orders in time. So, for example, that on the basis of the decision of the Stavka of July 28, 1942, the Southern and North Caucasus fronts were transformed into one North Caucasus front, and that Marshal of the Soviet Union S.M. Budyonny was appointed commander of this front, and Lieutenant General R.Y. Wiley Date, Malinovsky and Colonel General Y.T. Cherevichenko became his deputies. We learned only in the evening of August 2nd. That's when the great role of communications officers became especially clear to me. A liaison officer in battle is not just a responsible messenger who is tasked to deliver a combat order or report by a certain date. He is a trusted person of the commander, must have a broad operational and tactical outlook, be able to quickly navigate the situation. The liaison officer must be able to operate modern means of transportation, shoot with various types of weapons. Today he is under fierce enemy fire, crawls to the observation post or to the forward units. Tomorrow he flies an airplane, drives a motorcycle or a car, rides a horse or overcomes a water obstacle. In any weather, day or night, he is obliged to fulfill the task by the deadline. Especially great is the role of a communications officer in the dynamics of combat operations. In May 1942, A.P.B. Borodankov, as the best battery commander of the 2nd Guards Mortar Regiment, was assigned to the operational department of the operative group of the front. In early July 1942, he was sent as a communications officer to the disposal of the Chief of Staff of the front, General A.I. Antonov. Borodankov had to use a liaison airplane, drive a car. He twice swam across the Don. Since the creation of the Mobile Group, Borodankov, with pilot Starshinov, flew to Bataysk, Selsk and other points, reported to our units the direction of enemy tank and mechanized columns. In the evening of July 30th, I handed Borodankov, exhausted, not fallen a few days, a secret package. It contained a special report and a map of the Mobile Group. They had to be transferred to the front commander, communication with which was lost. The pilot managed to find the headquarters of General R.Y. Malinovsky. After reading the report, Malinovsky ordered Borodankov to fly back and give me a package with a combat order, which indicated the direction of withdrawal of the Mobile Group and the next lines of defense. In the area of the State Farm Giant, the plane was attacked by Messers. One of them came from the side of the Sun and machine gun burst through the engine. The U-2 burst into flames, tumbled. The fire engulfed the cabin. Borodankov saw how a sharp roll pilot fell overboard. The uncontrolled machine was rapidly falling down. Borodankov grabbed the handle, duplicated control, and with great difficulty leveled the plane. Landing the car engulfed in flames, Alexander Petrovich received severe burns. Fortunately, his eyes, covered by flight goggles, were not injured. From the strong impact on the ground, Borodankov was thrown out of the cockpit. He threw off the burning tunic and immediately saw that Hitlerites were running to the plane. Borodankov grabbed his gun, but terrible pain stiffened his movements. The burned skin was coming off his hands. Overcoming the pain, he began to shoot. Soldiers of the airfield team came to his aid. Losing his last strength, Borodankov managed to tell them that he was a communications officer and must by all means deliver the secret package to its destination. He was brought to the aviation unit near Belaya Glina, and soon the airplane with the secret package took off. I learned about the further fate of Borodankov after the war. More than 2 years Alexander Petrovich was in different hospitals, underwent several plastic surgeries. After treatment he could hold a pencil with his disfigured fingers and turn pages. Good physical hardening, great willpower helped him to graduate from the Law Institute. Now Borodankov lives and works in Leningrad. He was awarded the title of Honored Lawyer of the RSFSR. In 1958 we met with Alexander Petrovich in Leningrad, and soon after that I wrote a letter to Marshal of the Soviet Union R.Y. Marion, then Minister of Defense of the USSR, with a request to note the feat known to him communications officer. In February 1958, at a solemn meeting of the workers of the city of Leningrad and the soldiers of the Leningrad garrison, dedicated to the 40th anniversary of the armed forces, the commander of the Leningrad military district, Marshal of the Soviet Union Ni Krylov, read the order of the Minister of Defense of the USSR to award Alexander Petrovich Borodankov personal gold watch, and by the 25th anniversary of the victory over Nazi Germany, Borodankov was awarded the Order of the Red Banner. At about 1 o'clock in the afternoon of August 2nd, I received the following radiogram to the head of the mobile group, Colonel Nestorenko, immediately report to Marshal Budyonny. Together with Lomakovsky, I left for Golkovichi, where the headquarters was located. At the head of the mobile group remained the commander of the 176th Rifle Division, Colonel Rubenyuk, who proved himself as a very brave, strong-willed, energetic officer. We did not catch Marshal of the Soviet Union S.M. Budyonny in Golkovichi. He left for Armavir. The front VPU and the headquarters of the GMCH operative group were preparing to move to Belorekenskaya. Having received the necessary data on the location and condition of our units, Ivan Nikiforovich Lomakovsky and I left for Armavir. On August 2nd, the enemy with large forces of infantry and up to 200 tanks went on the offensive and seized Rasipny, Zhukovsky and Krasnaya Polyana. From this boundary, one tank corps of the enemy struck at Kropotkin and the second at Stavropol. To cover Armavir, the front command hastily transferred from the Black Sea coast of the 1st Independent Rifle Corps of Colonel M.M. Shapovalova. However, he did not have time to take the defence, and on August 3rd, under the blows of the enemy tank corps, was forced to withdraw behind the Kuban on a wide front. Fascist planes were circling over Armavir. In the centre of the city, bombs were bursting and fires were burning. At the bridge, rearguard units of the 1st Independent Rifle Corps entered the battle. Moskvin's 14th Division, Sidorov's 58th, Logvinov's 48th, and a combined battery of the 43rd Guards Mortar Regiment covered the crossings on the rivers Sinyuka and Chamlik with their fire. Tanks and motorized infantry of the enemy began to bypass their flanks, threatening to encircle them. On August 6th, the divisions withdrew behind the Laba River. With the help of the headquarters of the 14th Division, we managed to unite their actions at the site of Labinsk, Kurganaya. The 14th and 58th Divisions disrupted by fire all enemy attempts to force the Laba. On the night of August 7th, Lomakovsky and I left for Belorekenskaya to the front's VPU. There was also the headquarters of our task force GMCH. Here we learned that 18 and 19 GMP with troops of the 51st Army were transferred to the Stalingrad front, 25 GMP and 101 OGMD were now operationally subordinated to the 56th Army and moved to Krasnodar. 49 and 8 GMP with units of the 176th Rifle Division were retreating to Nalchik with heavy fighting. 2 divisions of 67 GMP, headed by Major Nozarev and Captain Kabelnikov's division, from 2 GMP retreated to Maikop. About 43 GMP, which was operationally subordinated to the 37th Army, was not known. In Belorekenskaya we met with R.Y. Malinovsky, reported to him about the state of our units and our combat orders. As always, Rodion Yakovlevich calmly and attentively listened to us and recommended to leave for Maikop to strengthen the defence of this very important direction with Guards mortar divisions. In his headquarters we urgently formalised the order, orally given in Labinsk, and left for Maikop. In the order, the Guards mortar units were given a completely independent task to keep the defence, to cover the withdrawal of our troops to Maikop and to fight with enemy tanks. On the section of the front from Kurganaya to Labinsk was heavy defensive fighting 40th Mechanized Brigade. It occupied the defence on a wide front having an extremely weak artillery reinforcement. In the direction of make-up units of the 18th and 12th Armies were retreating. These were small groups without artillery and anti-tank means. We had to combine the efforts of the Guards' mortar divisions to put a powerful fire barrier in the way of the enemy. Having consulted with Lomakovsky, I decided to appoint Lieutenant Captain A.P. Moskvin, a very brave and determined man, Commissar Battalion Commissar E. Y. Yurovsky, a judicious and strong-willed officer. The subgroup consisted of the 14th, 58th, 48th separate divisions and the combined battery of the 43rd GMP. Moskvin's task was to establish communication with the 40th Mechanized Brigade, the headquarters of which was in Anarkovo, together with the brigade commander to develop a plan of defense on the Laba River and prevent the enemy from advancing to Maikop. In Maikop we looked for the commander of the 67th GMP, Major A. Nozarov, and the division commander of the 2nd GMP, Captain I. L. Kabolnikov. Nozarov I ordered to establish communication with the commander of the 383rd Rifle Division, General K. I. Provalov, and Moskvin's group, to cover the withdrawal of our troops to Maikop by the fire of their divisions and to prevent the breakthrough of enemy tanks. On the night of August 8th, we arrived in Belorekenskaya at our headquarters. The VPU of the front and the headquarters of the task force were preparing to move to Kadyshenskaya. After familiarizing ourselves with the reports from the 25th Regiment and 101st Division, the artillery depot and PRM, exhausted by continuous travel and sleepless nights, we lay down to rest. Despite the infernal fatigue, I could not sleep. I was overcome by anxious thoughts. The commanders of the 25th Regiment and 101st Division reported that near Krasnodar, since August 6th, heavy fighting with enemy tanks. And although the small divisions of the 56th Army and the fighters of the Krasnodar detachment of the People's Militia heroically reflect the onslaught of the enemy, the situation there remains difficult. Artillery lacks ammunition, because of which some artillery regiments are withdrawn behind the Kuban. In the 25th Regiment and 101st Division shells left for 2 or 3 salvos. On the night of August 9th, the headquarters of the task force was located in Kadyshenskaya, on its northwestern outskirts. In the morning we had to present ourselves to Marshal of the Soviet Union S. M. Bodiony. The headquarters was preparing us a report on the condition of the units, and suddenly Moskvin appeared. He looked worried. "What happened, Arseny Petrovich?" I asked. "Tanks of the enemy forced the river Laba to the south of Labinsk, bypassing us on the right, going to Maikop. All attempts of Hitlerites to force the Laba River on the section Kurganaya, Labinsk, we repulsed. I asked permission to urgently withdraw divisions to Maikop." Moskvin was right. It was necessary to immediately remove divisions from the border of the Laba River and transfer them to the defense of Maikop. However, for this we needed the permission of Marshal Budyonny. Lomakovsky, Moskvin and I urgently went to him. We were travelling with an alarming message and an extremely unpleasant request. But we had no other way out. If our units did not withdraw to Maikop, fascist tanks and motorized infantry could break into it and close the exit to the mountains. About 5:00 in the morning we drove up to the front's VPU. Our sudden appearance and request excited Semyon Mikhailovich Budyonny. We had to listen to many bitter reproaches. However, the situation was such that it was impossible not to agree with our arguments. It was necessary to withdraw the Katyushas and prepare for decisive battles in the mountains. Having received permission, we returned to our headquarters. The Chief of Staff by radio gave a command to the divisions to withdraw to Maikop. By the evening of August 9th, tank units and motorized infantry of the enemy broke into Maikop. Our units had time to withdraw behind the Belaya River 67 GMP with the 12th Army and divisions Moskvin, Sidorov and Kabolnikov with the 18th Army. From the village of Saratovskaya we managed to transport a large number of M13 and M8 shells of the task force of the North Caucasus Front. Later we provided our units with these shells. In the battles near Maikop died Captain V.D. Sidorov, was wounded Commissar E.J. Yurovsky. Heroic actions of the 383rd Infantry Division of General K. Provalov stopped the further advance of the enemy in the Maikop direction. Having met stubborn resistance near Maikop, Hitlerites began the offensive on the right flank of the 18th Army in the direction of Apsheronsk and Neftogorsk. On the left flank of this army, the 13th Tank Division of the Germans and motorized division of SS Viking, having captured Belorekenskaya, were tearing towards Kabardinskaya and Kadizhinskaya, created a threatening situation for the units and headquarters of the 18th Army. With the capture of Kadizhinskaya, the enemy would cut the only road to the rear, to Tuapse. We make a decision from Mykop urgently call our divisions. I radio Moskvin that he and his division should immediately arrive in Kadizhinskaya. Roger. Moskvin replied. An hour and a half later, having made a 50-kilometer march, Moskvin's division has already taken up a firing position on the southern outskirts of Kadizhinskaya. By this time from Nozarov's observation post there was a connection. Nozarev reported that enemy tanks and motorized infantry approached Kabardinskaya and transmitted the initial data for firing. Soon Moskvin's division gave the first salvo along the gorge. The rumbling sound echoed repeatedly. "Well done," Nozarev shouted over the phone. "It is necessary to repeat the salvo at the site." These first salvos of Katyusha in the Caucasus Mountains were of invaluable help to the 18th Army. The threat of the enemy coming to its rear was eliminated. A few days later in the Georgievsky Gorge, I reported to Marshal S. M. Budyonny about the condition of the units, about the shells taken from the village of Saratovskaya, about the 14th Division, and about the events in Kadizhinskaya. Marshal ordered to present all distinguished sailors to the award. Soon 23 sailors of the 14th Division were awarded orders and medals. The commander of the Division A, P. Moskvin, was awarded the Order of Lenin, Commissar E.Y. Yurovsky the Order of the Red Banner. Moskvin was also promoted to the rank of Captain 3rd rank. Unfortunately, this courageous man and outstanding commander did not live to the end of the war. In the summer of 1943, A.P. Moskvin was seriously wounded in the battles near the village of Krimskaya and died in hospital. After the war, his name was given to a street in Sochi and an ocean-going motor ship. Arseny Moskvin now sails the waters of the Baltic Sea and the Atlantic. In early August, on the section of the front from Krasnodar to Mykop in the Caucasus Mountains withdrew 7 divisions and 1 battery M13, as well as 2 divisions of M8. Later, 2 more divisions of the 8th Guards Mortar Regiment arrived from Nalchik. Now the Task Force GMCH Southern Front was called the Task Force GMCH Black Sea Group of Troops of the North Caucasus Front. I was ordered to command the group. From the first days of combat operations in the mountains, we faced difficulties in the combat use of Katyusha. The mountain roads literally constrained our divisions. It was not easy to find suitable sites for firing positions. Often it was necessary to place the units along the roads, one after another, at long distances. This made their aiming very difficult. There was also a problem of determining the smallest angle of aiming in the mountains. The point is that due to the large dispersion when firing rockets, a fairly wide sheaf of trajectories is obtained. When firing through a mountain, there is a probability that part of the shells of the salvo will hit its top. And our troops, as a rule, occupied the defence on the tops and crests of the passes. We had to urgently develop firing rules for mountain conditions. We also came to the conclusion that to defeat the enemy on the reverse slopes, it was necessary to use mortar method of firing, i.e., to fire at elevation angles of more than 45 degrees. If during direct fire volleys on flat terrain we had to undermine the grooves under the front wheels of combat vehicles to reduce the aiming angle, now, on the contrary, we had to raise the front wheels. At elevation angles of more than 45 degrees, the dispersion ellipse was further stretched along the front and reduced in depth, which increased the effectiveness of fire on reverse slopes, facing the enemy. At the same time, short-range fire along gorges was found to be very effective when the dispersion ellipse was extended in depth. Such salvos covered well the targets located along the gorge. As a rule, enemy troops were concentrated in them, especially their second echelons, rear areas, headquarters and warehouses. The terrain conditions and the limited amount of ammunition required from the commanders of units, divisions and batteries a creative approach to firing. So, for example, sometimes it was more appropriate to give volleys in front of the neighbouring section of the front, that is, to conduct a kind of crossfire. However, all this did not yet solve the problem of artillery support for our infantry and cavalry fighting in the mountains, where there were no roads for vehicles and artillery. Mobile mountain units were required. In the last days of August, Lieutenant Colonel A. Ivzyukov informed me that the chief of the PRM Alfarov offered to produce light portable launchers for M8 shells. We could receive these shells in sufficient quantities from Baku. The proposal was worthwhile. Soon after awarding the sailors of the 14th Division, I told them about the idea of creating mountain Katyushas. If you find good inventors and rationalizers, I said, we will create such installations by our own efforts. Before I could finish, voices were heard. We have such comrades. Here, for example, the electrical engineer of the division, Senior Lieutenant Sulyaev, or the chief of ammunition, Senior Lieutenant Rips. A few minutes later, I was already talking to X.I.A., Sulyaev and L.R. Rips. Our conversation turned into a kind of meeting to work out a tactical and technical task for the development of a mining installation. My imagination was already drawing pictures of the actions of our people. I imagined them climbing up steep mountain paths with the packs of the launcher taking a convenient position. The mountain launcher is quickly assembled, brought to battle, and finally unexpected volleys in the mountains. But I realized that to realize this dream, a lot more is needed. 2 days later, Sulyaev and Rips presented a tentative scheme of a possible variant of a portable 8-shot installation. It was obvious that they understood the basic idea. They told me about their idea with great enthusiasm in turn. I made some remarks and recommended that the launcher should be constructed of 3 basic units: guides, truss and machine, and also asked to think over the system of sighting device, as we could not count on standard sights and panoramas. After our conversation, Sulyaev and Rips were seconded to the order of the head of the PRM Alfarov. With them I sent him a note summarizing the tactical and technical requirements for the mining installation. Alexander Fomich accepted the assignment with great enthusiasm. It was his long-standing dream to create a lightweight portable Katyusha. He actually took on the responsibilities of the leading designer for the creation of a new type of weapon and the head of all work related to its production and firing tests. For the manufacture of the first rocket launcher in the PRM was created a team of 7 people. It included the most skilled workers: Gubkin, Kazov, Kolesov, Karabanov, Gryaznov, Malakov and Koshelev. A few days later, I went to the PRM to check how the work was going. They were in full swing. Was developed a schematic diagram of the installation, made working drawings of the main components. An acceptable system in terms of size and weight had already been drawn up. About 2 weeks after the start of the work, a prototype of the mountain battery was produced and test firing was carried out in the direction of the sea from the Riviera Park in Sochi. The first volleys of the mountain battery caused a commotion in the city. Local air defense posts decided that air bombs were bursting on the water. Sirens wailed, people ran for cover. The testers did not expect such an effect. In the future, they coordinated their actions with the posts and headquarters of the city's air defense. After the tests, I reported to the commander of the North Caucasus Front, Marshal of the Soviet Union S.M. Budyonny, that we had developed the M8 mountain viewing machine. The Marshal ordered to show him the firing of this unit. On the next day, the machine and shells were delivered to the Georgievsko Gorge, where the headquarters of the Black Sea Group of troops of the North Caucasus Front was located. The place for firing was chosen on a small plateau. The installation was to fire through the gorge on the mountainside at a distance of about 1.5 kilometers. The area where the shells fell was well visible from the observation post, which was about 100 meters from the firing position. On this firing with Marshal S.M. Budyonny arrived Chief of Staff of the Front, General AII Antonov, members of the Military Council. The mount had a total weight of 68 kilograms and consisted of 3 main parts: a package, a truss and a machine. Each unit weighed 22 to 23 kilograms. The package consisted of guides for 8 projectiles. The truss, on which the package was fixed, was provided with a turntable. The machine looked like a solid support circle with a cross in the center and 4 hinged legs like a spider. At the ends of the legs were support legs with holes in which metal pins were hammered. These were used to firmly fix the machine to the ground. Farm with a package of guides rotated around the central bolt. For horizontal aiming, an angle scale with an accuracy of 0 to 0.5 artillery divisions was applied on the support circle. The turntable of the truss had a slit with a pointer for counting divisions. It provided horizontal aiming at any firing azimuth. For vertical aiming, i.e., for giving a given elevation angle, a metal semicircle was attached to the right side of the package, turned in a downward arc. On this arc a scale in angular degrees was applied, because in the firing tables there was a graph of elevation angles in degrees. The angles of elevation corresponding to the range of fire were measured by means of a cord with a plumb bob. This was simple and reliable. Without a level, the elevation angle was determined accurately. Thus, the sighting system of our installation allowed to do without complicated optical and mechanical devices, which were impossible to get, and provided the necessary accuracy. Initial aiming at the target along a given azimuth was carried out with the help of a mortar collimator and an artillery bussel. After familiarization with the installation, a salvo was fired. All 8 shells flew out almost simultaneously, leaving fiery tails in the pre-dawn sky. A moment later we saw the shells explode on the opposite side of the gorge. The fire blazed, light grey puffs of smoke appeared. The thunder of the explosions filled the gorge and echoed somewhere in the mountains. Everyone was silent, as if waiting for something else. Finally the marshal said, "Repeat the volley." In about 10 minutes the volley was repeated. And again the same effect, all the shells in the target area lay in a small area. Shooting was conducted at short range on a steep mountainside facing us. The slope was overgrown with small bushes, which created a dark green background. Therefore the bursts were clearly visible and the dispersion was small. After the second salvo, everyone walked over to the installation and examined it. The installation, still smelling of gunpowder, was in good order. Here, at the firing position, it was decided to organize the production of such installations in our PRM with the involvement of Sochi railway workshops and the formation of 12 mountain batteries. Later this decision was formalized as a resolution of the Military Council of the North Caucasus Front. Thus, an important event took place. The first step in the creation of mountain reactive artillery was made. By the decree of the Military Council of the Front, the general management in the creation of mountain viewing installations and formation of mountain batteries was entrusted to the Military Council of the Operational Group of the Front. I appointed Lieutenant Colonel M.P. Gorokhov as the head of the formation and Battalion Commissar T.V. Popov as his deputy and political part. Responsibility for the production of installations and coordination of work with the railroad workshops assigned to A. Ivzyukov. On the decision of the Military Council of the Front, we reported to Moscow Deputy People's Commissar of Defense General V.V. Oborenkov. To check the case we had conceived and to provide assistance from Moscow, we were sent from the main armament directorate of the State Ministry of Defense, a military engineer of the 3rd rank NN. In Yorishev, a military representative from the plant compressor, Senior Lieutenant Dobrokotov, and designers Isakov and Vasiliev from the design bureau of the same plant. A few days later I left for Sochi, where after the first demonstration firing our RPM moved to. In Sochi the workshop was located on the territory of the Sanatorium Riviera. In the garage of the sanatorium there were metalworking machines, free production facilities, and a large yard, where it was possible to deploy the work. After the creation of the first experimental unit, it was necessary to urgently organize the production of 48 of the same. However, design, production and supply difficulties began to arise one after another. After all, the production of installations was deployed in the conditions of an isolated front on the territory of the Black Sea coast of the Caucasus, where there were no industrial enterprises capable of providing us with substantial assistance. We immediately faced a question where to get batteries for so many mountain installations. In rocket artillery, batteries are needed to ignite powder charges. Without them, firing is impossible. The messengers sent by Alfarov all over the Black Sea coast got only a few used batteries, which were barely enough for one battery. What to do? And so Alfarov had this idea to abandon the electric circuit and thus get rid of the need to have a battery on each launcher. The igniter of the powder charge igniter of the rocket projectile was to be ignited by firing a blank rifle cartridge, for which it was necessary to make a special cartridge case with a striker. The cartridge was to be mounted on a bracket instead of the standard squib on a bracket, so that its exit port entered the nozzle of the rocket projectile. The cocked firing pin was to be released by pulling the pin. The idea was so unusual that we could not immediately appreciate it. Everyone was used to the electric circuit. However, when we understood it, we realized that the new method was even more advantageous for the mining rig. It simplified its maintenance and reduced its weight. Alfarov's proposal was accepted, but then a new difficulty awaited us all. Smokeless rifle powder did not ignite the igniter of the M8 shell. We tried different powders, thin shavings from nitroglycerin checker, artillery powder, but the igniter didn't light. We had to look for black hunting powder. Fortunately, it was soon found in a hunting collective in Sochi. But it was necessary to select the optimal dose, because with a full cartridge case was blown in the chamber, and it could not be removed, and small doses of powder did not ignite the igniter of the projectile. These experiments were time-consuming, but successful. However, this system was still cumbersome. 8 percussion devices were required for each installation. Having familiarized himself with Alfarov's proposal, a representative of the Moscow group, Senior Lieutenant Dobrokotov, made his own proposal, changing the nature of the launch. It was about the use of fire communication. The essence of it was that the cavities of the nozzles of the projectiles were successively connected by tubes bent in an arc. The launch of rockets was carried out as follows. A blank rifle cartridge was fired into the nozzle of the middle projectile in the row and ignited its powder charge. The gases of the powder engine of this rocket projectile, escaping through the arc-shaped tubes, ignited the powder charge of the neighboring projectiles, and those in turn ignited the following ones. And now this original design is made in metal. The installation for testing was taken to the firing position, the sea beach of the sanatorium. All present moved 100 meters away, behind the barrier of the beach. The sound of the volley was unusual, like a single hissing explosion. But what was it? The first fountain of rupture rose about a kilometer from the shore, the second a little closer, and the rest began to rapidly approach the shore. Alfarov commanded, "Get down a moment later, 30 meters away from the testers." The water rose up with a deafening roar and immediately crashed down. Circular waves rolled lightly from the explosion site and soon rustled in the coastal pebbles. It was the last, 8th shell. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. And the following happened. The installation on the ground was not firmly fixed, and at the launch the pressure of the jet of exhaust gases of the first projectile created a tipping moment for the installation. The second projectile came off its guide at a greater angle of elevation, and its jet increased the overturning, and so on. In short, the projectiles were coming off their guides at the time when the installation was tipping over. It was a kind of fan. The last shell came down almost to the zenith. It could have fallen on the shore, where there were many people. Fortunately, it didn't. Tests showed the necessity to break the fire link and put on the upper and lower rows of guides on the rifle cartridge with its own fire link. On the legs of the Spider were welded plates with holes, where metal pins were hammered to grip the ground. After these modifications, the installation was again subjected to extensive tests, which gave good results. Thus was born a system of multiple launching of rocket projectiles using a rifle cartridge and fire link. A difficult task for our designers turned out to be the creation of the aiming and guidance system. I myself had to take a direct part in solving this problem. The transportation issue was solved relatively simply, following the example of Mountain View artillery batteries. To the bows of cavalry saddles were attached devices for fixing the main units of the installation. For transportation of shells, special satchels were created, which were attached to the saddles on both sides. They could hold 8 shells, 1 salvo of the installation. Special satchels were also used for carrying. They held 4 shells, 2 in the front and 2 in the back. Before sending the first formed mountain battery into battle, we decided to conduct a tactical exercise with live firing in the mountains near Sochi. The exercise showed that the personnel was prepared and the battery would be able to fulfill combat tasks. to the area of combat operations, to the Goitsky Pass. The battery with 5 volleys went by automobile, and then the guardsmen made their way to the mountains on foot. Together with the battery went me and Yorishev. Just before the exit he suddenly fell ill with jaundice, but still he did not want to stay where he was. The first march with dismantled installations and shells the battery did well. The column was led by a guide. In front followed the control platoon, then the firing platoon, and after it the support platoon shell carriers and a household platoon with food. The battery was provided with everything necessary for independent action in the mountains. Having overcome a rather difficult mountain route, we climbed up to a small plateau, the area of firing positions, preliminarily outlined on the map. Here we found a clearing where we could place all 4 installations. Yorishev stayed at the firing position, and we, with the battery commander and the control platoon, began to climb to the crest of the heights. When we came to the observation post of the commander of the rifle battalion defending this ridge, it was still light. The regimental commander and the battalion commander were very pleased with our arrival. On the terrain they showed us where the front line was, where the enemy was, where his strongholds were located, and from where he was trying to attack. Together with the regimental commander and the battalion commander we outlined the target, a hillside overgrown with bushes. It was a fascist stronghold, and behind the slopes of the hill were their strike groups and second echelons. The liaison officers pulled the wire line to the firing position, and the battery commander began to prepare the initial data for firing. An hour later Yorishev reported by telephone that the battery was ready. But we still decided to first give 4 test shots, and then the battery salvo. On the phone I asked Yorishev to tell the commander of the firing platoon to load only the upper rails in the first installation. After all, we will be firing over the crest of the mountain, on which are our. Soon we heard a sharp hissing sound like a powerful whistle, and a few seconds later 4 82mm shells burst almost simultaneously. Having made sure that the shells lay in the target area, we decided to give a battery salvo. Some time passed, and the battery commander again gave the command, battery, fire. Again we heard a short, but sharper, hissing sound, and then the shells of our salvo rumbled over us like a flock of teal in the night. They began to burst with a sharp crackling sound in the vicinity of the target. The rumble of 32 exploded shells echoed through the mountains and gorges. It was the first Katyusha fire attack in the mountains of the Goitsky Pass. Commanders and fighters of rifle units were delighted with the volley. Of course we were happy too. The commander of the rifle battalion addressed me with a request whether it was impossible to give more shells to this battery. We have a lot of shells, but it is difficult to deliver them here, I answered. You should keep in mind that these installations can fire not only from closed firing positions, but also by direct fire through gorges and ravines. Only for this you have to know how to choose a firing position and camouflage the installations well. The salvos must be given suddenly. You and the battery commander will work out the techniques and tactics of combat use of mountain Katyushas. I observed the second salvo of the mountain battery at the firing position when it was already dark. By its sound and visual effect it differed sharply from the salvo of BM-8 batteries. This salvo was very fast. 32 shells were fired almost simultaneously. Once again, wishing success to the guardsmen and bidding them farewell, I, Yorishev and the adjutant moved on our way back. Now we were confident that the battery would be able to carry out combat missions. The mining installations were operating without fail. We were pleased with the new ignition system, which rid the mountain batteries of batteries, launchers and electric power cable. Late at night we returned to the headquarters of the 67th Guards Mortar Regiment. The test of strength withstood not only the mountain installations, but also N.N. Yorishev, this charming, persistent and energetic man. Despite his weakness after a bout of jaundice, he was smiling. He was pleased that he had to take part in the first combat salvos of Mountain Katyusha. Later on, as the batteries were ready, they were immediately put into operation. A total of 58 M8 mountain units were produced and 12 batteries were formed from them. 10 units were left in reserve. Later, 9 mountain batteries were combined into 3 separate divisions, 3 batteries in each. The rest were attached to the M13 and M8 divisions. The formed units were sent to reinforce units operating in the most difficult terrain conditions in hard-to-reach areas. Even during the first tests of the rocket launcher, the idea of creating a division of Katyushas on drift cars to protect the Tuapse-Sochi railroad running along the Black Sea coast was born. At our suggestion, the Military Council of the Front decided to form such a division. At our disposal were allocated 4 railroad cars for rocket launchers and 4 platforms for the transportation of shells. Almost simultaneously with the rocket launcher, a 12-round launcher was designed and manufactured on a railroad car. It provided for circular firing and an electric firing circuit. 2 such installations were mounted on each drill car. On October 11, 1942, General I.E. Petrov took command of the Black Sea Group of troops of the North Caucasus Front. We had to show the commander the combat firing from the railroad cars. In addition, we wanted to demonstrate a fully finalized rocket launcher with its firing link and circular firing, as well as a rocket launcher for launching M13 shells. The tests were conducted under Alfyorov's direction in Lazarevskaya, located between Sochi and Tuapse. The choice of firing positions for the M8 and M13 rocket launchers was not difficult, but it was not a simple matter for the trains. The wires of the railroad line were in the way. Before the firing, the commander of the Black Sea Group of troops of the North Caucasus Front, General I.E. Petrov, and members of the Military Council carefully inspected the presented samples of installations, asked a few questions about their combat capabilities. Then the firing was demonstrated. It was successful. When the installation M13 was ordered to disassemble, then immediately revealed a defect. The package, the truss and the machine were connected to the electrical wiring. In the electrical circuits were not put plug connectors. The installation was ordered to be finalized. Leaving General I.E., Petrov thanked for the demonstration and ordered to speed up the production of the units and provide them to the units being formed. Thus, thanks to the creative initiative of A.F. Alfyorov and the workers of the PMD, supported by the Military Council of the GMCH Operative Group of the Black Sea Group of troops of the North Caucasus Front, a new type of missile weapon was created, meeting the specifics of military operations in mountainous terrain. In 1944, on the 4th Ukrainian Front, at the suggestion of Captain V.I. Krasnoper and under his leadership in PRM-62 mountain units were mounted on Vilis. 2 divisions of such combat vehicles successfully operated in the Carpathians. In October 1942, a separate Guards Mortar division on railroad cars was fully formed. Its commander was Senior Lieutenant Vinogradov. This officer had sufficient combat experience and good training. One day in early October 1942, when I was in the PRM, Alfyorov introduced me to a senior lieutenant, commander of a detachment of boats based near Sochi. The detachment commander asked to give him some mountain rigs to use on the boats. Given the urgent need for maneuverable firepower to protect the coast, I instructed Alfyorov to allocate 1 installation and provide sailors with practical assistance in its installation on the boat, to train them to fire rockets, provide them with firing tables and the necessary number of shells. After some time, Ivzyukov and I visited the sailors and made sure that our mountain Katyusha fit well into the dimensions of the boats and significantly increased their firepower. Having seen this, I ordered Ivzyukov to transfer 3 more installations from the available reserve to the sailors and to release shells at their request. On a dark November night, a detachment of boats armed with rocket launchers stealthily approached Anapa and made a fire attack on the concentration of enemy troops. The salvo of 4 boats was only 32 shells, but it was so unexpected that Hitlerites, only after a few minutes, opened indiscriminate firing from anti-aircraft guns and machine guns. When the Nazis came to their senses and realized where the volley came from, our boats were already far out to sea. In January 1943, during the preparation of the landing operation near Novorossiysk, the commander of the Black Sea Group of troops, General I.E. Petrov, ordered me to give the sailors 8 more mountain rigs, which were then mounted on the minesweeper Skumbria. During the landing near Novorossiysk, in the area of Sunjukskaya Spit, Skumbria, armed with rocket launchers, participated in the artillery support of the landing. One of its salvo was 96 shells of 82mm caliber. It was the first missile-carrying fire support ship in the Black Sea. To reinforce the troops who heroically fought on the bridgehead south of Novorossiysk, was sent the 3rd Guards Mortar Division of Mountain Katyusha under the command of Guards Captain D. I. Amolchik. His deputy in the political part was the former commissar of the PRM Captain F. Novosad. February 9th, together with Rifle Units Division Yermolchik loaded in Gelendzhik on 2 transports of the Azov flotilla Tractorist and Zemlyak. On the night of February 10th, under the cover of warships of the Black Sea Fleet transports went to Malaya Zemlya. Torpedo boats of the enemy discovered them and attacked them. Tractorist was sunk. Captain F. Novosad, the division's control platoon, and 1 battery were killed on it. The 2nd transport, Zemlyak, which carried 2 batteries and the division commander Captain Amolchik, hit an underwater rock, was damaged and had to return to Gelendzhik. During the day, at the expense of other mountain batteries, the division was restaffed, and on the night of February 12th, the 2nd flight safely landed on Malaya Zemlya without losses. On February 13th, on the site of the 83rd Marine Rifle Brigade, the division entered the battle. The appearance of mountain Katyushas in the fighting order of rifle units inspired the fighters. Sudden volleys of rocket launchers inflicted great damage to the enemy. In order to preserve their batteries and use them with the greatest effect, Captain Amolchik carefully studied the features of the terrain and came to the conclusion that, contrary to established rules, firing positions should be chosen as close as possible to the front edge of our defences, as this strip is almost unseen by the enemy and less exposed to artillery and mortar fire. Small-sized and light installations were unnoticeably, for the enemy carried out through communication routes, trenches, excavations and tunnels in quarries, and installed in firing positions 300–400 metres from the front edge. Shells were delivered to the firing positions at night along the same communication routes. In providing the division with shells and food, much credit belonged to Guards Lieutenant Grufsky. Captain D. I. Amolchik, this modest, organised and brave officer, showed tactical maturity, initiative and resourcefulness. For skillful leadership of the division and personal bravery during the fighting in the Little Land, he was twice awarded the Order of the Red Banner. These orders were presented to him there, on Malaya Zemlya, by the head of the political department of the 18th Army, Colonel Lee Brezhnev. On Malaya Zemlya, Captain Amolchik was accepted as a member of the Communist Party. There he also received a party ticket. The division stayed on Malaya Zemlya for more than 200 days and fired more than 6,000 shells at the fascists without losing a single installation. The 2nd Mountain View Division of Katyusha under the command of Capt. I. Zhiko. This division was immediately after its formation was transferred through the Lazavsky Pass to the section of the 46th Army of General K. N. Lizeledzi. With its volleys it supported the rifle units that heroically fought on the mountains Semashko, Dva Brata, Indyuk, on the Goitka Pass. Later Zhiko's division was also landed on Malaya Zemlya and rendered great assistance to our units there. But that was already much later.